Here we are again, America. Deer Hunter DVM coming back at you. It's September the 14th. Out here scouting a bean field tonight that I've been over watching the last month or so. Velvet's starting to peel and bucks are starting to shift a bit. Still on a couple down here, so it definitely worthwhile to sit back and watch. I got a direct message from somebody that read one of my articles. I just wrote an article for North American Whitetail that was come out this last month about like the veterinary biology and the human biology essentially of like scent and scent control and how the deer brain interprets scent and stuff like that. And I was really proud of that article. They actually used it for their cover feature, which I was like, holy cow, that's quite an honor. I thought it turned out quite well. But one of the guy Barrett that was messaging me, he follows this YouTube channel. He talked about something that I just made a little blurb about in that article about using bubbles as wind checkers. So, when you look at wind checkers, there's a handful of ways guys do it. Some guys will use, a lot of guys use milkweed in the mobile hunting world, and that's okay. It works good. Some guys use just like the squirt bottle powders, and I think those are essentially worthless. They don't tell you hardly anything. Some guys use these little smoke sticks or like e-vapor gimmicks. Again, about the same as powder. You just get a little real-time sample of what's around you. But I've been packing this little gimmick around with me for the last, 20 years. It lives right here in this like bino slash pocket right there for me. And anytime I've got my binos on, whether it's turkey season, and I want to check how wind is using a certain area, like future reference for deer season, I'm using it. If it's shed season, using it. If I'm out running trail cameras, using it. It's a great little tool. And let's go over some of the advantages and disadvantages real quick, and let's kind of be objective about it. So, again, powders and those little vapor gimmicks, they just show you what's happening around the human. Like, they don't show you what's happening out there at 20, 30, 40 yards. So, those are out for me. They're pretty limited. I like milkweed, but here's the thing with milkweed. 2 points about it. Our skin gives off human scent, right? And when you grab that milkweed, you're putting your scent on it, and you're sending human scent downrange. You really are. And I don't feel like that's advantageous. And if you ever felt milkweed, like really studied it and felt it, it's kind of fibrous and porous. And I know darn good and well it probably holds human scent. Now, to what degree, I have no way of quantifying that. But milkweed kind of has I would figure, once it dries out, kind of has a porous or fibrous surface to it microscopically. And I just feel like it could hold human scent. So unless you're using it with gloves every time, Anyway, that's debatable. I'll admit that. But most times guys, when they use milkweed, and I've done it before too, they'll pull milkweed out and they'll let 1 or 2 floaters go. And you can watch those guys go, but sometimes they get hung up in tree limbs and stuff, and I just don't feel like it works great. But I feel like with bubbles, here's my advantages with it. All right, so uncap that guy, not touching it with my human hand. Now the downside is putting breath out there, right? I'm putting human breath out there, which is it's the same as the human scent coming off your skin, no doubt about it. But I'll take a drop or 2 of like doe and estrus urine and put it in. You don't want to get it on your lips because it'll taste awful. But try and mask that, if you will. But with the bubbles, I find you can I've sent out about, I don't know, 20, 25 samples of how the current flows right there. and just doing that. Now, I like how bubbles flow around things. Like sometimes wind will take a bubble through tree limbs, and sometimes if you get enough glycerin in it, and I'll talk more about that in a second, those bubbles will be hardy enough, they'll actually bounce off some little sticks and things and continue, and you get the formulation of your bubbles right, and they will literally fly for 50, 60, 70 yards sometimes, given the right conditions. So what I like about that is it gives me a broader sample size of the wind current that's around me. And I like to use it to see what wind does with the structure that I'm around, whether it's a ridge top or an inside corner, especially where wind tends to swirl. I just feel like it has some advantages over milkweed. Regardless, I'm not going to convince the diehard guys to drop their milkweed and use kids' bubbles, because they'll be like, "No, I'm not using that. I'm way too tough and cool for that." But give it a try, guys. Like, what could it hurt? And I can honest to goodness say, I have never had a deer in 20 years of using these. I don't think I've ever had a deer pick up on it and go, "Whoop, human bubbles, run." Like, it's just not in their vocabulary. But I really like that, and it stores easy. Another little tip: if you're gonna buy one that unscrews, like this guy, where the wand is built into the lid and it screws in. You can screw it down tight. That way, like some of them have a flip cap and snap shut. Don't buy those, because they will come open in your gear and you'll have bubble shit everywhere, and you don't want that. But I like having that. You just and blow a handful out, and I love having a sample size of the wind current. That's the whole benefit to me, is sheer numbers of wind checker samples. Each bubble is a checker on its own, and you'll see all those bubbles flow around things. They'll bend around trees, or they'll all sink down into a creek bottom, and you can watch them raise, and they will tell you things that you'll start. You use these enough, and I've used them for, again, probably close to 20 years. You'll get to be able to visualize the wind and see it before your bubbles are even out there, like in these little inside corners or hooks of the timber. I rarely pay attention to wind direction anymore. Like what your forecasted wind direction tells you, that's all worthless. I use these to kind of, quote, wind map my certain spots, and I'll tell you about a spot that it looks totally, completely backwards. There's a spot we call the crime scene, and we have killed like 4 shooters off of this tiny little narrow pinch. And we've killed them on west winds that's blowing right across the top of this pinch. But for some reason, the stand is up higher on close to a field edge, but it drops off immediately down into this little creek gully. And they walk this creek gully in front of the stand, and like there's only one way in, one way out. You blow those bubbles on a west wind facing that gully to the east, and for some reason the contour of the ground right there, when it catches like a 8 to 10 mile an hour west wind, which looks on paper like it's completely wrong for that trail in front of you, it rolls off the top of the hill behind you, and it creates this suction updraft. And I've killed some good deer there using that technique, and Troy shot a giant out of it with a west wind. It's like a vacuum, pulls your scent up high. So you guys give that a try. I know it was, sorry for the 10-minute video on the pros and cons of using kids' bubbles in the woods, but give that a go. Spike it with a drop or two of doe and estrus urine, or whatever the time of the season calls for, and give it a try and let me know how it comes out for you guys. Thanks for tuning in.